Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We're back with another edition of our book study of They've Uncrowned Him by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. I hope you've been enjoying this. The feedback has been great. If you are seeing the preview of this on the YouTubes or listening to it on the podcast platforms, please be advised that in about 20 minutes or so, it's going to go behind a paywall. And the whole series is there. We are on, I think, number 10. There's going to be about 15 or so in this. So congratulations to those who've made it this far. And if you'd like to continue with it, enjoy what is available to the general public for now. And the rest will be behind a wall in about 20 minutes or so. But there'll be a lot before that 20 minutes, I promise, that you can take away from this. So we're at the point in the book now, if I just bring it up, where he's talking about how the popes unmask the conspiracy of the sect. And in our last edition of this, we talked about how there was this plan to overthrow the church that was the result of Masonic forces and so forth. And again, this has been talked about 1,000 different times. And the focus of this podcast, this series on this book, is to let's go deeper than the conspiracies of, all the sort of, fanciful, or I'm not saying they're not real, but let's go beyond the sort of externals of what the conspiracy is. The Masons, the Illuminati, whatever. They all have realities to them, and the secret societies and their rituals and stuff are terrifying and strange and demonic, and that's true. But what is the ultimate goal of the plans of the various groups that hate the church? It is to imbibe in the lives of Catholics and into the doctrinal propositions of the church organized naturalism. This book study is not on Father Fahey, but I've talked about some of his works in my other podcasts at various times in the last year or so. And he talks a lot about organized naturalism. This is seen in rabbinical Judaism. This is seen in Masonry. This is seen in Liberalism. This is seen in Modernism. If you really look through history, there's probably, half a dozen heresies, and they're all kind of the same. It's attacking Christology, so the divinity of Christ. It's attacking divine revelation, so it's relativism and so forth. It's attacking the church, so it's liberalism in politics and in religion. And all of and then Gnosticism, basically, the secret knowledge is over here and follow this guru, that guru. These are kind of all the various heresies, and they kind of manifest in different ways, sometimes under different names, but they're all pretty much the same. If you look through all the various heresies that have attacked the church, they all have just basic elements of all of these things. You can find it in Protestantism. You can find it in Islam. You can find it in the various pseudo-Christian sects that have kind of come up against the church. You can find it in liberal Catholicism, modernism, and so forth. All of these aspects of attacking the divinity of Christ, the kingship of Christ, the supremacy of the Catholic Church, the truth of history and scripture, whether it's through, a sort of exaggerated evolutionism or something like that. You find these in history, and they all just kind of come from the same demonic, sulfuric, satanic source, that is the devil. So the really important thing is, we have to go beyond, as I said, the externals. Yes, the Freemasons are creepy in their weird little rituals, and that's creepy, but what do they want? They want you to imbibe organized naturalism. They want you to deny the kingship of Christ. If you believe in Christ personally in your personal life, if it's you and your Bible, if you're a liberal Catholic, and you personally are Catholic, but you do you, I'll do me, that's them winning. They want religious liberty. They want relativism of religion in society because they want to have Catholicism on par with all religions. They want to distort your history through Marxism, etc. It's all the same thing. So the important thing is Catholics in this time, in 2024, many decades into this crisis, which was fomenting many decades before it exploded, they want everyone on earth to adopt the errors of the French Revolution. They want everyone on earth to adopt the errors of sola scriptura, me and my Bible, etc. Because then they've got you. Even if you're personally a devout Catholic, even if you say, I believe the teachings of the church, but I'm not going to talk to anybody about it or whatever, then what they've done is they've relegated Christ to private opinion, and then everything is equal, and then society is secularized, and then religion takes a back seat, and everyone basically acts as a Mason. Because what does a Mason want? Not a brick Mason, you guys do good work, but a Freemason. What does he want? He wants you to believe that it's conduct over creed. It doesn't matter what you believe. But the error with that is that believing things is a work. Believing things is an action. There's no such thing as just belief. There is right belief and wrong belief because all beliefs have consequences. So if you can imbibe through the school systems and into the kids and whatever, these false ideas, then these false ideas become false policies. They become false laws. They become false religion through the secular sphere. So let's go back to the book. And I'm going to read some lengthy portions of popes. I don't usually read as much of each chapter as I'm going to do here, but these are such great portions from especially Pope Pius X that I want to make sure we don't miss anything. So you can see here on the screen, I'm not going to read much from the first page, but he says at the beginning, the conspiracy of the liberal sects against the church consisted, as I have shown you in the preceding chapter, in rising up to the assault on the church by using its hierarchy, in perverting it up to the highest degree. And he has something here from Leo XIII, and I'm just going to skip over what Leo XIII said, not because it's not important, but because I want to get to the heart of what Pius X said, because modernism is really the crux, in my opinion. And he says, and it's right here where I've highlighted for you, I'll just put that in yellow so you can see it easier. He says, next in St. Pius X, it's St. Pius X's turn to tell the anguish that blinds him in the face of the progress brought about by the sect, even in the interior of the church. Very important. Pope Pius X is the Pope in 1903 to 1914, and he's saying there's already a disease inside the church. So the crisis did not start with Vatican II, although Vatican II is definitely responsible, and the Second Vatican Council aftermath and the new Mass is responsible for hastening the crisis, but it didn't inaugurate it. He writes in his inaugural encyclical E Supremi Apostolatus on October 4th of 1903, he expresses his fear that the time of apostasy that the church was entering may be the time of the Antichrist. This must be understood as Antichrist, counterfeit of Christ, usurper of Christ, and here's the text. So here's what Pius X said. He said, we experienced a sort of terror in considering the deadly conditions of humanity at the present hour. Can anyone not be aware of the sickness so deep and so serious, which, at this moment much more than in the past, torments human society, and which, growing worse from day to day, and eating away at it right down to the core, is carrying it away to its ruin? Venerable brethren, you know this illness. In regard to God, it is surrender and apostasy. Beyond any doubt, there is nothing which leads more surely to ruin, according to this word of the prophet, behold, those who go away from thee shall perish. The pontiff continues, in our time, it is only too true that the nations have trembled and the peoples have contemplated insane projects against the Creator. This cry of his enemies has become all but common. Withdraw from us. From this come the habits of life, as much private as public, where no account is taken of his sovereignty. Let's just pause there for half a second. Moneyline. He says I'll just read that portion again to make sure that we're all on the same page here. He's talking about this illness, this apostasy that may be the time of the Antichrist. And we're talking about Pope Pius X here, not some, crazy bearded Canadian weirdo radtrad on the internet telling you about the Antichrist. We're talking about an extremely holy Pope, the first Pope canonized in almost 500 years, kind of a big deal. And he's talking about this comes from the habits of life, as much private as public, where no account is taken of his sovereignty. What does that mean? He's saying that the great danger here is that no account in society, both in the church's society, the society of the church, and the society of, lived society outside the church, in secular society, in political society, no account is taken of his sovereignty. So Pope Pius X already, 121 years ago, is talking about the dethroning of Christ in the nations as being at the heart of the problem. As being at the heart of the problem. Keep that in mind as we continue. The Pope continues. He says, much more, there is no effort or artifice that is not put to work in order entirely to abolish the memory and even the idea of him. Meaning all aspects of society are rewriting history. That's important. That's what's going on. That's been going on for a long time. Right now in Canada, I think it's today as I record this, we have that holiday. Well, it's a holiday. What a mockery of the word holy day, but it's called Truth and Reconciliation Day or whatever. And it's about the fake mass graves that never happened. And we're supposed to mourn, the Holocaust of all the natives in Canada, which never happened. And, and really what it is, it's an attack on the truth. It's an attack on the goodness of the Catholic Church and her role in forming Canadian civilization. And this sort of thing has been going on forever. He continues, he who thinks these things over has the right to fear that such a perversion of minds is the beginning of the evils announced for the end of time, and perhaps their establishing of contact with the earth. And that truly the son of perdition of whom the apostle speaks may have already made his arrival in our midst. So he's saying at that time, the Antichrist might already be around. That's pretty hardcore. So great is the boldness and so great is the frenzy with which they throw themselves everywhere into the attack on religion. They batter the dogmas of the faith. They strain with an obstinate exertion to annihilate every relation of man with the divinity. In return, and there you have, in the words of the same apostle, the proper nature of the Antichrist. Man, with a temerity beyond words, has usurped the place of the Creator by raising himself up above everything that bears the name of God. It is to such a point that, powerless to extinguish the notion of God completely in himself, he nevertheless shakes off the yoke of his majesty and dedicates to himself the visible world as a kind of temple where he pretends to receive the adorations of his fellow creatures. He sits in the temple of God where he shows himself, as it were, as if he were God himself. That's heavy. Let's break that down for a second here. Pope Pius X is saying, I'm going to read again here. So he says, man is powerless to extinguish the notion of God completely in himself. So we can't avoid, this question of God. We can't. I mean, any person with sense who looks around, sees creation, says there must be a creator. I mean, that's just the basic thing. It's like it's an inalienable truth. Yes, atheists exist and things like that, but it doesn't speak to people naturally. People might catch on to atheism because it allows them to sin, or there's practical reasons, or makes them feel smart or something like that. But yeah, and you see these waves of atheist propaganda and things like that, but it's not sustainable. Even in the Soviet Union, they had sort of the state atheism, and the society went so far deep into the pits of hell, they had to bring back the Orthodox Church, infiltrated by the KGB, but they had to bring back the church to basically allow people to have some sort of moral compass, because people just can't live without God. They just can't. Even in the realm of opinion, even taking aside for a second here, putting aside the notion of the truth of the Catholic Church as the one true Church of Christ or something like that, but just in the realm of opinion, in the sense of like, what principles do people have to guide their lives? People just can't live like that. They cannot extinguish the notion of God. It's just in us because we're made by him. And that's just the way it is. I've always said, do a thought experiment. People that devote themselves to atheism. You think about these stories of these athletes or celebrities or something like that their lives spiral out of control and they're doing drugs and living a lecherous or whatever, a lustful lifestyle or whatever it is. And then there's always those, documentaries about how so-and-so found Jesus and he turned his life around. Where are the stories about so-and-so finding atheism, turning his life around? They just don't exist. I mean, at most you'll find people are being parts of some sort of weird cult and they leave and become an atheist and their life is better, but this is because they're not in a cult anymore, and cults are bad. But people need God to turn their life around. That's just the way we are. We need God, but we can't extinguish that. So he says, we can't extinguish this. He says, nevertheless, shakes off the yoke of his majesty. So yes, God exists, but we're not going to make him king. And dedicates to himself the visible world as a kind of temple. He's talking about the naturalism. Naturalism is not materialism. Sometimes people in the comments will say, how can you say, rabbinical Judaism is naturalist? They believe in God. I'm not talking about materialism. Naturalism is different. Naturalism is more like deism. It's the religion of many of the founders of the United States. Yes, God exists. He's the divine watchmaker, but he set the watch and he lets it tick. There's not an interaction, a responsibility to God. There's an acknowledgement, but not a responsibility. Those are different. And he sees the visible world as a kind of temple. This is the worship of nature, where he pretends to receive the adorations of his fellow creatures. This is the egotism of our society. This is TikTok. I have Twitter, and sorry about that. I know I'm kind of a hypocrite considering I have it, but whatever, for professional reasons. I can't bring myself to take a selfie. I'm just worried if I take a selfie, I'm not going to recover from that. I don't know. It just seems so weird to me. I understand, sometimes my wife will say, let's take a picture. We're in this pretty meadow or on a walk or something, and we'll, kind of smile at the camera. I get that. But I'm just saying this insistency to adore ourselves and have others adore us. This is at the heart of the apostasy from Christ, because we have usurped his role as king, and we've made ourselves individual kings. This is the rugged individualism of liberalism. This is at the heart of the errors that inspire the new Mass. This notion that the Mass must be approachable for man because the Mass apparently is for men, when really it's for God. You see the problem there in mentality. This is the apostasy away from Christ that St. Pius X is talking about 121 years ago at this point. He continues. I'll bring the screen back up here. He continues. He says, Archbishop Lefebvre writes, in his encyclical Pascendi, and it's right here where I'll highlight for you. He says, in his encyclical Pascendi of September 8th, 1907, on the modernist errors, denounces with clear-sightedness the infiltration of the church by the modernist sect, an infiltration already in progress, which was, as I have told you, the ally of the liberal sect in the plan to demolish the Catholic Church. Here is the passage of this document, salient to my purpose. Before I get to that, I just want to hammer home here. I've been saying that modernism and liberalism are basically bosom buddies. Liberalism is where it begins, and this is largely in the sphere of political reality. Modernism is what happens to liberalism when it's sort of more theologized in the realm of doctrine. So first, from the external, we dethrone Christ, which is liberalism. Then from the internal, we dethrone Christ, which is religious relativism. And they're kind of two sides of the same coin. You don't really have one without the other. In fact, since the time of the council, a lot of the so-called conservative theologians and prelates, like Bishop Barron, Cardinal Ratzinger, for example, they have many good things to say. But when you really look into their doctrines and you compare how they talk about Christ and society, when you compare what they really believe, a lot of what they say really has a lot to do and a lot in common with the pre-modernist liberals. So they're orthodox in general terms, and as far as like the doctrines of the church. But when those doctrines are applied to life and society, they become kind of relativist. And this is kind of at the heart of relativism or of liberalism. But to us today, because we're inundated with the insanity of just full out modernism and its, chimeric stepchild neo-modernism, which maybe we'll talk about as the series goes, which is really just a more palatable version of modernism. It's a more subtle and sneaky version, but leads to the same conclusions. They seem like conservatives compared to the crazy modernists. But remember, liberalism becomes modernism, or leads to it, essentially. So let's read this quote here from Pius X. Pius X says, and it's right here underneath the yellow portion, he says, what particularly requires us to speak without delay is that the agents of error are not to be sought for today among our declared enemies. So don't look outside the church, look in the church. They're hiding, and it is a cause for very sharp apprehension and anguish. In the very midst and in the heart of the church, enemies so much more fearsome as they are less openly enemies. Think about that for a second. It's the enemies inside the church that are more fearsome than those outside. So stop looking for all the problems. I'm not saying you do this. I'm just saying in general, stop trying to blame Klaus Schwab for everything. Stop trying to blame, that secret society for everything. Yeah, they're bad. But this holy pope, the first pope canonized basically since the Council of Trent, is saying to us, the most pernicious enemies are the modernists in the church. That is where the great apostasy from God really comes from. You can have all the enemies of the society hammering against the walls of the church, but as long as the church is strong, they'll eventually tire themselves out. The church has withstood tempests and hurricanes of crisis in the past because she stayed strong while society crumbled. Think of the fall of the Roman Empire, for example. The society crumbled, but the church stayed strong and then renewed society. But once the church starts to crumble from the inside, once your institutions are co-opted by heretics, this is a worse apostasy. This is a worse heresy than any world war could ever be as far as the ultimate destruction to souls. He continues, we are speaking, venerable brethren, of a great number of lay Catholics, and what is still more to be deplored, of priests who, under the pretense of love for the church, absolutely short on solid philosophy and theology, impregnated on the contrary right down to the marrow with the venom of error derived from the adversaries of the Catholic faith, set themselves up with contempt for all modesty, as renovators of the church. Let's just pause there for a sec. I want to read that one more time because it's so important. There, he says, impregnated with a venom of error derived from the adversaries of the Catholic faith. Impregnated with error derived from the adversaries of the Catholic faith. And he says this comes from the fact that they're absolutely short on solid philosophy and theology. My friends, this is what we see in Catholic apologetics writ large. How many times have you seen the general milieu of Catholic apologetics trying to show you how all of the rationalist philosophers of the last 200 years can be seen through a Catholic lens? You can't do that. Obviously, in all types of philosophers, there are going to be things of truth. Heck, if you read Karl Marx, you're going to find little passages of brilliance. If you read Nietzsche, you're going to find little passages of brilliance. I mean, these men were wrong, but they were not idiots. They were smart, even if they were wrong-headed. But what he's saying is that Catholics, lay and clerical alike, have no solid philosophy or theology. They're not formed in the principles that guide the intellect to apprehend truth. At the end of the encyclical Pascendi, which Marcel Lefebvre is citing right now, Pius X is very clear that the solution to the crisis of the church, the doctrinal crisis of modernism, which he dealt with very well, but then historical circumstances after he died, the First and Second World War and the Communist Revolution and things like that really made seminary formation really poor because of persecution and so forth, which allowed these errors to spread kind of under the cover of darkness, which wasn't his fault. It's just God allowed it to happen for some reason and whatever. But he says at the end of his encyclical, the solution is scholasticism. The solution is Thomas Aquinas. Now, I know some people are groaning, saying, Kennedy, don't you know that there are Eastern Catholics and they prefer certain theologians and so forth? I'm not saying that there's no salvation outside Thomism. Personally, I love reading St. Augustine more than anything. That's just, St. Augustine speaks to me. There's nothing wrong with reading the scriptures alone. There's nothing, or not scripture alone, but spending your time on the scriptures. There's nothing wrong with reading Bonaventure. There's nothing wrong with reading these other great saints of the church, these theologians. But the reason why he's saying that scholasticism, meaning sound philosophy and theology, and there is no theologian/philosopher in the history of the church who has been canonized to the degree that Thomas Aquinas has. There just isn't. Because the method of scholasticism is the sure method to apprehend truth, because what it is realism, the philosophy of realism. So the animating force of Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and even the good Roman Stoics and things like that. The realism, the conforming of the mind to external reality is realism. Thomas Aquinas is the best. He's the best. You can read the others. You can love Augustine. You can love the others. The church fathers, especially for scriptural study and so forth, they're like second to none. Nothing wrong with that. But there's a reason why St. Pius X is saying in this encyclical near the end of it as well, that you must go to Thomas. Ita ad Thomas. We say go to Joseph, ita ad Joseph. You must go to Thomas. And he says in the encyclical, there is no surer sign that a man is edging towards modernism than his rejection of Thomas Aquinas. And a little while ago, I tweeted something. It was a response to someone on Twitter talking about something. And I talked about modernism. And Larry Chapp, who's a very well-known theologian, and he's pretty good on a lot of things, loves the Nouvelle Theologie, though. And he replied to me in a very combative way. He ended up deleting his tweet. But he basically said, goodness gracious, Kennedy can't go beyond Thomas Aquinas. Right there. There's no going beyond Aquinas. There is in addition to Thomas, but there's no going beyond. We can't go beyond the angelic doctor. He's a once in history kind of intellect. We have to go to scholasticism. It will help us to understand what's going on in the crisis. Back to the book. And next, I'll continue here. And I'll highlight here so you can see where I'm reading. And I'll bring it back up. Sorry, it's not on the screen. Those men may be astonished that we rank them among the enemies of the church. No one will have just reason to be surprised at this who, putting aside their intentions, of which the judgment is reserved to God, will indeed attempt to examine their doctrines and their system of word and action. Enemies of the church, to be sure, they are this. And to say that it does not have any worse ones is not to stray away from the truth. It is not from outside, indeed, as has been already noted. It is from within that they contrive its ruin. The danger lies today almost in the very veins and bowels of the church. Their blows are so much more certain as they know the church more intimately. Add to this that it is not to the branches or to the shoots that they have put the axe, but to the very root, that is to say, to the faith, to its deepest fibers. Then, once this root of immortal life is severed, they set themselves the task of making the virus circulate through the tree in such a way that no part of the Catholic faith remains protected from their hand, and that there is no part that they do not strive with great care to corrupt. Very somber warning. I just want to take a little second here. By the way, this is the first part. We're going to go to a next chapter after this. I'm going to go behind a paywall in a couple minutes, just so you know. We're going to end with this part from Pius X here. You know, a lot of people will come after traditionalists and say, you guys are going after the indefectibility of the church. You know, how can you say the church would do things that are bad? How can you say the church could be filled with all these bad theologians? Listen, my friends, I'm just agreeing with Pius X. I don't have my own opinions. I'm just agreeing with Pius X. And I would rather be in agreement with Pius X than all of those modernists who have imbibed the doctrines that he so valiantly exposed. I would rather be in agreement with him than them. That's a pretty simple equation for me. I don't want to be part of the new springtime. I want to be part of the faith of all time that Pius X said was already in danger by heretics and modernists in every facet of the church 121 years ago. You are not striking at the indefectibility of the church to say that even the popes have been afflicted by this, because Pius X is saying that is happening in the church at the turn of the last century. And I think the last 50, 60 years of crisis have made it abundantly clear. And honestly, I think if people would spend their time reading the corpus, the work of Pius X, especially on modernism, I think that they would change their tune on a lot of stuff. But sadly, he's been memory hold, and you don't really hear a lot about him. But you need to get out of your echo chamber if you're like a Nouvelle Theologie, post-conciliar guy saying the rad trads are the problem. You need to get out of your head. You need to get out of your, the zone that you're in, and you need to go into the works of Pius X, and see where the truth lies. And he was talking about this a really long time ago, and it's gotten worse and worse as the years have gone on because he's ignored and his solutions are ignored. Okay, right now we're going to be going behind a paywall, and we're going to go to the next part of the book.